You can't be that good. You're with Julian on the Brownlow and election roundup week 2. Well, I guess so far we've seen that if Anthony Albanese gets a full stop wrong in a 10,000 word thesis, he'll be drubbed over the news for the whole week, whereas Scott Morrison could do anything. He barely said. He called a reporter Mr. Speaker twice in an interview. He's gaffing his head off and they just won't report it. The Australian news media has been... They may talk a good game in between elections, but they fall in lockstep when there is an election behind the Liberal Party. And they're the enemy. The Australian news media is the enemy. The main 3 TV channels and the print news media are universally for the Liberal Party, and they've been showing their colours. Happily, though, they might be in a period of flux where they decide that everything is so bad they will allow a Labour government, and that's still potentially on the cards. I haven't read an article. I haven't watched the TV thing. I see the headlines. Albo at Bluesfest, Anthony Albanese at Bluesfest. Listen to Jimmy Barnes, listen to Jimmy Barnes' son, listen to the eyewitness reports. Widespread on the news media, Anthony Albanese booed off stage at Bluesfest. Not true. Completely invented. For a start, he wasn't a gatecrasher. He's turned up at lots of Jimmy Barnes' gigs. Secondly, Jimmy Barnes invited him on stage. Thirdly, the booing was for when Jimmy Barnes mentioned the election, not Anthony Albanese. Fourthly, a lot of people cheered. He wasn't booed off stage. He got a warm reception the rest of the time he was at Bluesfest. Absolute garbage. But I have to say, I haven't been the biggest cheerleader of Anthony. I've said many times I wish Tanya was in the lead. I wish Penny was in the lead. I wish Christina Keneally was leading us. And I think that him getting COVID is the best thing that could have happened. I think both parties would rather not have their leaders in front of the news media. I think that is a defining characteristic. The more we can keep Scott Morrison in the sights of the news media and the cameras, the better. And the less we have Anthony Albanese there, he's got... For a start, Scott Morrison campaigned the last election with no team at all. He just rode around himself being Daggy Dad Scott Cam from the block. He didn't even use his party. Anthony Albanese has got a very strong backing in his party, and he's got very competent people that can do the talking. Penny's been out giving it, and she's probably the most credible, intelligent politician this country has. And the more Anthony Albanese is sidelined by COVID, I think the better, because all we're going to get is these gotchas. They line up their questions, and I'll ask him about this, I'll ask him, oh, got you, you didn't get this percentage point right. And that's all a lot of these journalists that are pro-Scomo are going to be on. But Scomo we need in front of the camera as much as possible, because even if he's not in front of the camera, he's got no team. But if he is in front of the camera, he's such an incompetent man, and he's so arrogant that he will screw up all the time. I said last week, we need Scott Morrison to keep screwing up, and he's doing a pretty good job of it. Josh Frydenberg, one of the potential people to roll Scott Morrison after this election. Don't believe the hype about change. Scott Morrison will get rolled if he wins. He'll get rolled by either Peter Dutton or Josh Frydenberg. The only reason he hasn't is he's such a political animal, and they've got no backing. They've got no capital. So Josh Frydenberg, alongside Scomo, he is one of the greatest exponents of, and let's not forget John Howard's come into the fray, one of the greatest exponents, using language, reducing the majority of independent female candidates to groupies. If you ever want an indication of the Liberal Party's problem with women, that John Howard would find the language and the word groupies, when most of the independents he's referring to as groupies are female politicians. But Josh Frydenberg and Scott Morrison indulge in the Labour did it more than pretty much any politicians going. They've been in power a decade, but it's still Labour's fault. I thought the best Josh Frydenberg moment this week was when he said to the Australian newspaper, we need a Liberal government to get returned because in the future, our peers are going to start underperforming economically and Australia will outperform them. If we had a real news media in this country, you would have asked the obvious question based on that statement, which is, So you're saying after 10 years in power, we haven't outperformed our peers, which you are responsible for, Josh. But in the future, if our peers start underperforming, we'll outperform them, which you aren't responsible for unless you're going around hobbling their economies. And that's your reason to get re-elected? The Solomon Islands has been a beautiful one, and I really do believe that China set this up because Scott Morrison is going into this election with national defence front and centre. He's going to try and use China as a whipping boy. Big mistake, by the way, because they're a lot cleverer than he is. So China have come into the Solomon Islands. Remember a few years ago when Peter Dutton and Scomo and everyone was having a big laugh about how climate change was going to destroy these islands and they're going to have water lapping at their door. Ha ha ha. Oh, look, it hasn't worked out quite well. They don't want to be friends with Australia anymore. This is straight front and centre. Penny Wong said it's the biggest strategic blunder on foreign policy since World War II that Australia have made. But this is front and centre at the Liberal Party. They put all these islands offside with their relentless rhetoric on climate change, and now they've turned to China. What a surprise. So that's been a really good one. That's going to haunt him the whole campaign. And his other big thing is the economy. But where is our media on the economy? We've got a terrible economy. He does things like removes people from unemployment queues by just saying that they're not there, even though they are. Even though the underemployed people in Australia is nearly 20%. We all know the standard of living and the cost of living is at record bad, high cost of living and poor standard of living. Record number of people employed in 2 jobs to make ends meet. Flattest wages for 40 years. Triple the deficit that Labor had that everyone screamed about. But our media is barely getting there. I did notice that old school chief cheerleader of Scomo at the Sydney Morning Herald, Peter Harcher, put the boot in to Scomo. David Crowe, another of the chief Scomo cheerleaders at the Sydney Morning Herald, put the boot in. So that was really good to see. Maybe they're just saying, no, this guy is just too bad. He is so awful. Peter Harcher bringing out how hypocritical it was to criticise the Labor debt when I think the biggest Labor debt was about 25% of the GDP, and it's at 45 under the 10 years of the Liberal government. The whole thing with Katherine Deves is just shocking. She's trying to make out now that she's in hiding and she's had death threats. The police say they don't know of any. This whole thing is a smokescreen. It's a disgusting smokescreen. I said last week, Scott Morrison is using Katherine as a... He likes using women as shields, doesn't he? So she can say the stuff that he wants to sort of use as a dog whistle on trans people just to appeal to a certain demographic of voters. And he doesn't have to get the blame for saying it himself. And the hilarious thing was that she's been turning the press away from her events and meeting with them selectively. And she had an event on Forestville on Friday and the press were kicked out. And even members of the public at this public forum were kicked out. The hilarious thing being that Scott Morrison said she will not be silenced. And allegedly, he has silenced her from speaking with the media. She's now doing selective interviews saying that her life is in danger. The whole point of this is, if you are currently in Australia dealing with the economic impacts of this economy, or any of the other things connected with climate change or foreign policy, are trans women in sport really your preeminent concern this election? If so, you're the kind of person that can be manipulated by 6 weeks of news media. So probably sit this one out. It's just not an issue in this election. Why are we talking about it? Gladys Liu, the ex-Chinese Communist Party member who had one of the most contentious entries into Australian politics ever, has been defended by Scott Morrison and calling Labor racist for their attacks on her very contentious entry into Australian politics and possible links with the Chinese Communist Party, calling Labor a racist. Now, remember when Sam Dastari was alleged to be connected with China and Scott Morrison called him Shanghai Sam, and he's calling Labor racist? So we need Scott Morrison front and centre as much as possible to continue being the great guy he is, and he will continue to screw up and offer as much. Like, he is not a tactician. He doesn't think ahead. He is a reactive man. He will keep blundering into situations and he will keep saying the wrong thing. So we just need him to believe that he needs to control the 24-hour news cycle. And long may COVID keep Anthony Albanese sidelined and away from those press conferences. And again, if you haven't made up your mind either way over the last 3 years, you're the kind of gullible person the press can buy with a few weeks. So sit the election out and let the adults deal with it. This is from Kurt Weill's new album.